Sometimes love doesn't end with goodbye, it ends with silence, and a door that never closed all the way. I still remember the first day I saw her again, standing in the front yard of that old house on Maple Street. The air smelled like sawdust and summer rain. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years, paint peeling, shutters hanging crooked, but she stood there as if the ruin didn't bother her. Maybe it even matched how she felt inside. Her name was Claire, and I was there to help her fix the place up, a favor to my mother's old friend, she'd said. I didn't really expect much. A few weeks of sanding floors, repainting walls, and then I'd move on again like I always did. But the moment Claire turned and smiled, something in the air shifted, quietly, like dust stirred by light. She was beautiful, not in the loud way that makes people stop and stare, but in the quiet kind that holds your gaze when you least expect it. Her hair was pinned loosely, a few strands escaping, brushing her neck when the wind passed. Her eyes, soft, gray, and tired, carried both warmth and a kind of distance, as if she'd learned to keep the world at arm's length. We started slow. She gave me a tour of the house, the creaking stairs, the room she called her studio, though she hadn't painted in years. She spoke in small, careful sentences, like someone who hadn't been heard in a long time. I listened more than I talked. It felt natural. By the second hour, we'd settled into a rhythm. She measured, I lifted. She planned, I worked. Every time our hands brushed, passing a tool, steadying a ladder, there was that flicker of awareness either of us wanted to name. Not attraction exactly, not yet. Just presence, the rare kind where you notice every sound, every breath, every heartbeat that isn't yours. At one point, she stopped to pour us lemonade. The glass clinked softly against the counter. She asked about my life in the city, what I'd been running from, maybe. I told her I wasn't running, just restless. She smiled a little. Restless, she said. That's a younger word for lost. There was no judgment in her tone, just quiet knowing. And for a moment, I didn't feel restless at all. Later that afternoon, I climbed the ladder to fix a section of loose molding. She held it steady from below, her hand brushing my wrist to warn me not to lean too far. That simple touch, her skin warm against mine, froze me mid-motion. I looked down, and she looked up. For half a breath, the world went still. Then she let go, clearing her throat softly. Be careful, she said, pretending not to notice what had just happened. I climbed down, pretending the same. But inside, something small had already begun, a shift I couldn't unfeel. As the sun dropped low, golden light poured through the half-open windows, catching the dust in the air like floating sparks. She thanked me for the help and said she'd see me tomorrow. I walked away from that house on Maple Street with sawdust on my hands and her voice echoing in my mind. I didn't know it yet, but that summer would change everything, not because of what we built, but because of what quietly built between us. The next few weeks slipped by quietly, the kind of quiet that feels like comfort rather than emptiness. Mornings began with the low hum of an old radio in Claire's kitchen, soft jazz, the kind you only ever hear on stations that don't bother with ads. The coffee would already be brewing when I arrived, the smell filling every corner of the house like warmth made visible. She'd greet me with a half-smile, hair tied up carelessly, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Somehow she always looked effortless, not trying to impress anyone, just existing in her own rhythm. We'd plan out the day's work, sanding floors, stripping wallpaper, patching cracks in the ceiling. The tasks were simple, repetitive, and maybe that's why they felt healing. There was a rhythm between us that didn't need words. She'd hand me a brush before I asked. I'd move the ladder before she even glanced toward it. In those small, wordless exchanges, I started to notice how attuned I'd become to her, to the way she sighed when she was tired, or the quiet hum she made when she was thinking. Sometimes she'd tell me stories while we worked. Little things, how she used to throw dinner parties in this house before her marriage fell apart, how she'd planned to paint the hallway a deep blue but never got around to it. I could tell she was trying to convince herself that talking about the past didn't still hurt. One rainy afternoon, thunder rolling softly above the roof, the power cut out mid-song. We both stood there for a moment, blinking in the sudden quiet. The only sound left was rain tapping against the windows. She laughed, a light, surprised sound, and went to fetch candles. When she came back, the flicker of flame painted her face in gold. She handed me one, our fingers brushing again, and that same quiet charge filled the air, the kind that doesn't ask permission. We sat at the kitchen table, listening to the storm. "I used to love nights like this," she said, "before everything got so loud." "What changed?" I asked. She stared into the candlelight for a long moment. "I did." Her voice didn't tremble, but her eyes gave her away. She wasn't used to being seen, not like that. And I wasn't sure I was ready for how much I wanted to understand her. So I just said softly, "You're still here, Claire. That's something." She smiled at that, not a big smile, but one that reached her eyes, faint and real. The storm went on, but inside, the air felt warmer. When the power finally returned, either of us moved right away. The sudden light felt too bright, too harsh. She blew out the candle slowly, watching the smoke curl upward. Then, almost to herself, she whispered, "Maybe it's not too late to start again." I wanted to tell her it wasn't. That starting again was exactly what she'd been doing every morning I saw her. But instead I just nodded, because sometimes words only ruin what silence makes perfect. That night, walking home in the wet streets, I realized something had changed. The house wasn't the only thing being rebuilt. By the third month, the house had started to look almost new again. The walls were smooth, the floors polished, the air inside lighter somehow. But between us, something heavier had begun to settle, not uncomfortable, just charged. I'd catch myself watching her more often now. The way she moved, deliberate yet graceful. The way she'd pause mid-sentence, as if catching herself from saying too much. Every time our eyes met, she'd smile, small and knowing, and then quickly look away, as if reminding herself there were lines she shouldn't cross. We never talked about it, whatever it was. But it lived in the spaces between our words, in the pauses, in the way she'd linger in the doorway when I packed up to leave. One afternoon, the air outside was thick with heat. We were repainting the living room. She'd chosen a soft cream, said it made the place feel like breathing again. She stood by the window, sunlight spilling over her shoulders, and for a moment, I forgot what I was supposed to be doing. "Something on your mind?" she asked, noticing me looking. I shook my head too quickly. "Just wondering if the color's too light." She smiled, faintly amused. "You're a terrible liar, Eli." She said it softly, but her tone stayed with me for hours, not scolding, not teasing, just honest. The kind of honesty that reaches somewhere you don't expect. Later that day, she went to answer a call outside. Through the open window, I could hear the faint edge in her voice, polite, distant, guarded. When she came back, I asked if everything was okay. She said it was, but her hands trembled slightly when she picked up the paintbrush. The next morning, I found out the call had been from her ex-husband. A neighbor mentioned it in passing. Small towns always talk. The rumor was that he wanted to reconcile. I didn't ask her about it, but that night, when I stopped by to drop off tools I'd forgotten, I saw her sitting alone on the porch. A glass of wine in one hand, her phone turned face down on the table. The porch light softened the edges of her face, made her look both older and somehow more fragile. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. She shook her head. "Just thinking." I sat beside her. The wood creaked beneath us. Crickets hummed in the distance. She didn't look at me, just said quietly, "People always want what they walked away from. Until they realize it's gone for good." Her words hit deeper than I expected. I wanted to tell her I wouldn't walk away, that I wasn't like him, but I didn't. She didn't need promises, she needed peace. Before I left, she touched my arm lightly. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "For what?" "For not asking me to explain." Her hand lingered there for a moment, warm, steady, familiar. Then she withdrew it, stood up, and told me to get some sleep. Walking home, I realized the truth neither of us had spoken, Sometimes love doesn't begin with words. Sometimes it begins with everything we're too afraid to say. It was late when the storm rolled in, one of those heavy summer rains that seemed to fall all at once, hammering the roof, blurring the world beyond the windows. I'd stayed longer than I meant to, finishing trim in the hallway, but neither of us said much about the time. Maybe we both knew neither of us really wanted the day to end. Thunder cracked close enough to shake the glass. The lights flickered, then dimmed into darkness. Claire sighed, half laughing. Not again. This house still hates me. I found a flashlight in my tool bag, handed it to her. Maybe it just wants you to slow down. She smiled, tired but genuine, and led the way to the living room. The air smelled of rain and sawdust. I lit one of the candles we'd used before, the flame catching on her face, soft light, soft eyes, shadows moving like secrets. We sat opposite each other on the floor, backs against the couch. For a while, the only sound was rain and the slow rhythm of our breathing. Then she spoke, voice low and steady. You ever feel like you've built your whole life around someone else's idea of you? I looked at her, at the faint lines around her mouth, the hint of sadness she no longer tried to hide. Maybe that's what growing up is, I said. Trying to unbuild it. She chuckled softly. You talk like someone twice your age. Maybe I just listen more than I should. Her eyes met mine then, really met them, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Something in the space between us shifted. The candlelight trembled. She told me about her marriage. About the silence that grew between them, the loneliness that didn't look like loneliness from the outside. Her words came in fragments, quiet, almost ashamed. When she finished, she exhaled, long and shaky, and said, I don't even know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because I'm listening, I said. She smiled faintly, and a single tear slid down her cheek. Without thinking, I reached out and brushed it away. Her skin was warm beneath my thumb. She didn't move. Instead, her hand rose, slow, hesitant, and rested lightly on mine. That moment felt suspended, as if the world had forgotten to breathe. The rain softened to a whisper against the windows. I could feel her pulse beneath my fingertips, quick and unguarded. If I'd said her name just then, I think she would have let me. If I'd leaned in, I think she wouldn't have stopped me. But something in her eyes, the flicker of fear, the memory of hurt, made me pause. She whispered, You should go, Eli. Her voice wasn't cold. It was careful, fragile, a plea wrapped in protection. I nodded, though I didn't move right away. The candle between us burned low, melting into silence. Finally I stood, grabbed my jacket, and said quietly, Good night, Claire. She didn't answer. Just watched me leave, the light of the candle flickering behind her like something trying not to fade. Outside, the rain hit hard again, soaking through my shirt before I reached the gate. But I didn't mind. The storm inside me was louder. That was the night I almost said it. The night we both almost did. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the world felt strangely hollow. The air was heavy with that after-storm quiet, puddles on the road, the faint scent of wet earth, birds still hesitant to sing. When I arrived at the house, Claire was already there, standing by the window with a mug in her hand. She looked composed, too composed, like someone who'd had a long night to build walls she didn't want to rebuild but had to. Morning, I said, setting my bag down. She turned, smiled politely, that distant, practiced kind of smile that hides everything real. Morning. You're early. I didn't sleep much. She nodded, took a slow sip of coffee, and said nothing else. We worked in silence that day. No music from the radio. No small talk about paint or coffee or anything at all. The air between us felt colder than the air outside. I kept trying to find something, anything, that might bridge it. But every time I looked at her, she seemed farther away. By afternoon, I couldn't stand it anymore. Did I do something wrong? I asked finally. She froze, brushed halfway to the wall. No, of course not. Then what's this? She turned to face me. This is what happens when people start reading too much into things that shouldn't mean anything. It hit harder than I expected, not because of what she said, but because I knew she didn't mean it. I didn't imagine last night, Claire, I said quietly. She sighed, setting the brush down. Eli, you're kind. You're good. But I can't. She stopped, eyes glistening. You don't know what it's like to build something from nothing, only to lose it all. You don't know how careful you have to become just to survive it. I didn't answer. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't sound like trying to fix her, and that wasn't what she needed. Later that day, a delivery truck pulled up. Boxes. Tape. New address labels with the city 2 states away. You're leaving? I asked, staring at them. She nodded. A friend offered me a job. I need a fresh start. When? Next week. That was when I understood. She hadn't been pushing me away because of what she didn't feel, but because of what she did. And because she was terrified of it. Still, pride got in the way. Guess that's my cue to wrap up early then. Eli, it's fine, I said too quickly. You deserve your fresh start. The lie burned as soon as I said it. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, something floral and tired and beautiful. You deserve someone who isn't broken, she whispered. I wanted to tell her she wasn't broken, just bruised. That maybe that's all love really is, two people learning to hold each other without hurting the sore spots. But the words wouldn't come. So instead, I picked up my tools and walked out into the quiet. Behind me, I heard her exhale, that kind of breath that sounds like both relief and regret. That was the day I started leaving. Not because I wanted to, but because she gave me every reason to believe I should. It took me 3 days to go back. 3 days of walking aimlessly through town, pretending to look for work I didn't want, pretending not to notice how every road somehow led back toward Maple Street. On the 4th evening, I gave up pretending. The sky was fading into that deep orange that feels like the world holding its breath. Her car was still in the driveway, half-packed boxes stacked near the porch. Through the window, I could see her moving slowly, folding clothes, pausing too long on certain things before tucking them away. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, but not shocked. Like she'd been expecting me, maybe even hoping I'd come. Hi, I said, my voice rougher than I meant. She crossed her arms, leaning against the frame. Hi. I wanted to say goodbye before you left. Her eyes softened. You didn't have to. I know, I said. But I wanted to. For a moment neither of us spoke. The cicadas hummed somewhere in the distance. The air between us was thick with everything we'd refused to say. Finally, she stepped aside. Come in. The house looked emptier. Walls bare, furniture pushed aside. But it wasn't the space that felt empty, it was her. The way she moved, careful, quiet, like she'd already started erasing herself from the life she'd known. I'll miss this place, I said. She smiled faintly. You'll find another project. I wasn't talking about the house. That stopped her. She set the box in her hands down and looked at me, eyes searching mine as if she wanted to find an easier version of the truth. But there wasn't one. I thought we were. I began, then stopped, shaking my head. Forget it. Say it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought we were building something more than walls and floors. She looked away, blinking fast. You were. I wasn't supposed to. Supposed to? She exhaled shakily. Eli, I'm leaving because I don't trust myself not to stay. The honesty in her words hit harder than anger ever could. It was the kind of truth that stripped you bare. For a long time, I just stood there, listening to the creak of the floorboards beneath our silence. Then I said it, not out of spite, but out of hurt. She said, I thought you'd stay. I paused, swallowing hard. And I said, you gave me every reason to leave. The words fell heavy between us, sharp and final. But what I really meant was, you made it impossible to go on pretending this didn't matter. Her eyes filled, though she tried to hide it. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know. I turned to leave. She didn't try to stop me, and maybe that was her way of loving me, by letting me walk away before either of us broke further. As I stepped off the porch, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of her perfume, jasmine and rain. I looked back once, just once, and saw her standing there in the doorway, still as the house itself. She didn't call my name. She didn't need to. Some goodbyes don't echo. They just stay quiet, and live inside you forever. Autumn came sooner than I expected. The days cooled, the light turned softer, and the town began to feel smaller without her in it. Maple Street still smelled like paint and rain, but the house at the end of it stood silent now, windows curtained, mailbox empty, for sale, sign leaning crooked in the yard. I told myself I'd moved on. Found a new job 2 towns over, a place with steady pay and no ghosts in the walls. But some evenings, when the sun dipped low, I'd catch myself looking toward the horizon, wondering where she was, if she'd kept her promise to start again. The truth is, I never stopped thinking about that last night. About the way she looked at me, not angry, not even sad, just grateful and broken at the same time. I kept hearing her voice, soft as rain. I don't trust myself not to stay. I didn't understand it then. I think I do now. Some people don't leave because they don't care, they leave because they finally do. A few months passed before her letter came. No return address, just my name written in that neat, slanted handwriting I'd memorized from notes she left on the kitchen counter. Inside was a single page. Eli, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to sit still long enough to write. I'm in a small town by the coast. I paint again. Nothing good yet, but the colors make sense in ways they didn't before. I wanted to tell you that the house sold. The woman who bought it said it felt alive. I didn't tell her it's because of you. I hope you're building something beautiful too. Thank you for staying longer than you should have. Claire. I read it 3 times before folding it carefully back into the envelope. My hands were trembling, not from sadness, but from the quiet kind of relief that comes when you realize something doesn't have to last to matter. That weekend I drove to the coast. Not to find her, just to see what she might have seen. The air smelled of salt and driftwood, the sky wide and forgiving. I walked along the shoreline until I found a flat piece of sea glass washed smooth by time. I held it up to the light, watched it catch the sun, and for a moment, I felt her presence, the same calm, steady warmth she carried even when she was breaking. It struck me then, love doesn't always ask to be kept. Sometimes it just asks to be remembered. When I got home, I pinned her letter above my desk. Not as a wound, but as a reminder that some people enter your life not to stay, but to show you how staying could feel. And though the house on Maple Street no longer belongs to either of us, I like to think part of us still lingers there, in the quiet hum of morning light through old windows, in the scent of sawdust and rain, in what remains after goodbye.